Out of every seax I own, this is the one I trust with my life. And I absolutely love this seax, this knife, here in front of you on my medieval table. But why do I love it? And why am I going to talk about it? Well, in this video, I'm going to cover a few things, and this is my favourite seax. I do own quite a few. There's a Norwegian style with the scabbard. I've got the one we've already talked about. I've got a Germanic earlier seax with a different style of blade. And lastly, the one which I've not talked about on camera yet, which I will do next, which is my very latest seax I own. But why do I love this seax? Why do I think it's one of the best things that I own? And in this video, we're going to talk about a few things. First of all, why? Then we're going to talk about the construction, the material, the blade shape, the handle patterning, the craftsmanship, the status and meaning, practical uses, personal history, how long have I owned it, where did I buy it from, why I chose it, and why I still love this seax. Of all the blades I own, of all the knives, of all the seaxes, of all the weapons, this here is the one that I will take to my grave. When one day I am no longer here, but the channel continues with the legacy of Northworthy, which is why I have created this channel. Because it's about being remembered, it is about word fame, it is about teaching heritage, it is about remembering our history. Because if we forget history, then we can't learn from the past. And if we don't learn from the past, we can't make a better future. So why do I love this seax? Well, I think the number one reason why I love this seax is because where it came from. Because it was given to me by my very good and late friend Thorolf. And I'll talk about that later on in the video. But not only that, it is the design of the seax. It is the history of where the knife came from. It is the bore element on the handle, the ring and dot. The fact that the handle fits in my hand so nicely, it feels like it belongs in my hand. It feels like I've been using this knife for many years, and in fact I have. But not just that, it's the simplistic sheath it comes with. I like how the fact it hangs from your belt rather than being across your belt like most seaxes are carried. And I think this is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. It is also very, very sharp. And yeah, I spent a lot of my time using this knife. I've used it on camp. I've cut meals with it. I've crafted. I've carved. I've cut string. So many different jobs I've done with this knife. So that is why I love the knife. Because it has a sentimental meaning to me. Because my late friend, who is no longer with us, Thorolf, gave me this many, many years ago. And it has been a treasured possession ever since. And in fact, this knife comes along with another knife, which I will show off in another video, a much longer Seax or seax, depending on how you pronounce it. And I will combine both of these for another video to talk about the both of them together, because they were both made by the same person and put together. So let's talk about the construction. Well, first of all, let's cover the construction of this modern interpretation. So most people, they would buy some spring steel and they would craft a knife, or they'll go to a blacksmith and a blacksmith would forge a knife. But in this case, this came from something different. Because believe it or not, this knife used to be a lang seax. So originally it would have been much longer. It would have been probably 18 inches to 24 inches in length. But at some point in its history, in the 1990s, whilst in combat, because it was originally a blunt lang seax, it broke in half. And so my friend Thorolf was very upset by this. But then an ingenious idea came to his mind. I will have the blade turn into 2 more knives. And that is what happened. And this is the remains of the hilt. So the hilt, the tang is in the handle of the original Seax, and the blade was cut off, angled, ground, and this is the original blood groove or fuller of the Seax. So it also shows and demonstrates that even in the modern times we reuse our items if they break. And the amount of times people have had broken swords and have turned them into Saxes or Seaxes, and even better if you put them on a forge and you forge them into something else. So in the modern times, this is probably constructed from a spring steel. And a spring steel is a very, very good steel because it keeps the edge. And it also has an awful lot of carbon in it. And this would be either EM45 steel or EM44, which is typically the spring steel they use in the UK to manufacture reenactment props. Mostly for blunt ones like this one, because most of my weapons are not sharp. They're actually blunt because they're designed for combat. They're designed to be used in the battle. And I'd love one day to get back into the hobby and actually visit groups and meet a lot of you amazing people out there who are into our medieval and Anglo-Saxon and Norse history. And let's not forget the Normans. The handle is constructed from a leg bone of a cow. And I think that's just a marvellous bit of handle. It feels really nice. It's been polished. It's been worked on. And then they engrave the boar and the ring and dot. And of course the scabbard is made from good veg tan leather and with copper rivets and the outlining of the sheath to give it sturdiness so that, especially with a sharp seax, you're not going to stab yourself. This is why the copper is around here. It is protection for the knife, but for you as well. Because if you didn't have this and you fall over, you could really badly hurt yourself, even in the modern times. And in the medieval times, one cut could get infected, and the next thing you know, you've got blood infection, you get sepsis, which they would not have known about, and you pass away, you die. Not the sort of death a Norse warrior wants, because all Norse warriors want to die on the battlefield, and why not? So that is the basic construction. Now, if we're going back to the original period of history, this knife would be constructed differently, because the majority of this knife would be iron, and then the edge would be steel. Because you don't use your good steel for all your knife, you want to separate it and you forge it into the iron. You get a flat edge and you put a groove in with a chisel whilst it's warm and hot, and then if you fire weld it, this is a very difficult technique to do, and you form a steel edge. And back in the day, you would have noticed a difference between the steel of the iron and then the actual steel. So the iron would have been darker and the steel would have been brighter. So this is all steel because it's a modern piece. And then of course the handle is reconstructed the same. It doesn't have a tang that goes all the way to the back, so it's been bonded in, and you could really improve this by taking the handle off, which I don't want to do, and putting on a nice copper, brass or silver mount plate there and one on the back. And I often thought about doing it, but I decided not to take it off, but I may one day make a nice little plate for the back of the bone. So that's the construction, and of course these would have been made by very skilled blacksmiths. And you know, if you're a historian, if you're into collecting medieval weapons or reenactor, then I do recommend buying one and adding one to your collection. So that's the construction and the materials. Which, when you think about it, there's not a lot of material in this. There's steel, bone, and if you're making a modern one today, you could go to a abattoir or butchers and ask if they get any big cow bones, and sometimes they do, and they will save them for you and give them to you. I've done that a few times and got some very good bones. But then what you have to do then is bleach the bone. I normally hang it outside for 6 months, let it bleach before I work it. But it's been a long time since I've done any bone work. So the materials in this are very simplistic. It's leather, it's copper rivets, steel of course, or iron and a steel edge back in the day, and bone. So it's very simplistic. So let's talk about the shape of this. So this is a broken back knife, but it's not your typical one which has a taper like this one, because if you see this one and this one here as well, you see both of these taper in. But this one is more parallel, because again, because this used to be a Langsax, the Langsax was parallel and probably didn't have the tapering on the blade. It was probably a very straight, slightly tapering Langsax. So this is why this is straight. And then as the blade was broken, they probably put a new handle on. I mean, this could actually be the original handle of the Langsax, but I don't know, because I never asked that question of my friend. And what do you think? Do you think this could be the original handle? And again, not all Langsaxes have fullers, but this one does have, and it's a nice thick fuller as well, or blood groove. This has been put in during the stages of smithing this Langsax, because this probably would have been made on a forge, and during the stage it's probably been hammered in using a certain tool. Although this could also be ground with something like a Dremel, so it could also be hand ground itself and not being made by a blacksmith. This may have been put together by a hobbyist or a reenactor. So that's the blade shape. So let's talk about the pattern on the handle, because not all Saxes have patterns. For instance, this one here with the Norwegian style handle, it's just turned, and this is probably my most favourite handle I own, and probably my second most favourite Sax, because I've used this one in combat so many times. In another video we will talk about it, but for now we'll go back to this one. So you can see first of all that there is a wild animal on this handle, and this is the design I copied for my shield, and it's a wild boar. And of course in the medieval times, wild animals like boars and wolves and I'm going to say sheep then, but of course they're wild anyway, and wolves and bears were around. And boars can be very, very vicious. This looks like a razorback boar because of this element on the back with the big tusks. And you can understand now when you're going hunting why you want to take a massive spear and not get mauled to death by one of these wild animals, because they are fierce. And certainly in places like in Texas, they grow wild and they're having a massive problem with wild boar. It's a pity we don't have that problem. I think we do have in places in the UK wild boar, which have escaped over the years. So what does the boar represent? Well, the boar represents Mercia. So this is a 8th century, early 9th century Sax, before the Kingdom of Mercia completely collapsed, and because of the invading Norse warriors. And of course that's such a fascinating era history, and I'm so proud to consider myself and call myself a Mercian. Even though I love the Norse, I love Viking and Norse culture, there's always going to be that little part of me which absolutely loves the Anglo-Saxons, because why not? The Anglo-Saxons were such an incredible people, and the culture and the artwork, it's just fantastic. And we should be proud of our history, because it's amazing how many British people, and don't forget Britain is not a country, it is a collective of countries, So I am English, and then before that I would consider myself to be Mercian. So this represents Mercia, so hail Mercia. But then we also have the ring and dot. And it's basically just a ring and a little dot inside of it. You don't always get the dot, sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. And that is one of the most oldest patterns in history. The ring and dot pattern goes back thousands and thousands of years. And it's very simplistic, but yet it adds that little bit of element of design to the handle. A little bit like this one here. But on this handle, made from antler, it should have been darkened, rubbed off, and then the ring and dot would have been more seeable, like on this knife. So it is basically saying it's, you know, it's giving you status, it's giving you an origin. If somebody saw this, they may say, oh right, are you from Mercia? But of course, you know, items were traded. You may just be a fan of boars, perhaps you're a farmer, you keep wild boars, and that is why you have a boar on your handle. So it doesn't fundamentally have to represent Mercia, but in this case it does, because the original owner, Thorolf, decided that he wanted it to represent Mercia. And I just love the pattern on that. And let's talk about the craftsmanship, or the craftswomanship even. Again, in the modern times, this demonstrates how, you know, brilliant and clever people are, that they can put these things together. And you know, we've had to learn how to make things, because not so many things like sheaths survive. We get the knives, we don't get the handles very often. We very rarely get sheaths unless they're in the right conditions, and sometimes you don't always get the iron. You may get the imprint of iron and a rust. You know, it will leave a element of rust behind. So archaeologists know that within that soil, within this little rusty patch, there was once a knife, because not all iron survives depending on the soil. So it demonstrates the craftsmanship, and also with the fact that they've gone a little bit further with the design, because you could have left that plain, but I think the design on this, especially how it fits nicely in the sheath, although technically you could say this is a scabbard because it's solid in construction, that's debatable. I'd love to know your thoughts on that. If a sheath has a solid backing of brass or copper around the edge, does that make it a scabbard? Because scabbards are normally solid in construction, with wood around the blade and leather put around the wood. So I'll probably still say that this is a sheath, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And again, we can look at the rivets. You can tell from the rivets head that they've been hammered. That gives that nice element of design to it. They're not modern rivets, they're old copper rivets. And again, that shows the ability of the craftsmanship. And the guy that made this was a very clever guy. I can't remember his name, but it goes way too far back in my history. But if he ever sees this on YouTube, well, thank you for making this back in the 1990s. And I'm so thankful that it's now in my hands and my collection. But what does it mean when it comes to status? So there you are, there's Thorolf, or there's, you know, Halfdan, you know, the mighty tall Viking, and he has a knife. In Anglo-Saxon culture, that represents your freedom. And especially when you go to, you know, the Althing or the Anglo-Saxon equivalent of a Witan, and you have the right to vote. When you vote, you have, when you put your weapon up, it's yay, and when your weapon's down, it's nay. And if I remember, it's called the weapon tack, or the weapon take. So this is how putting your hands up to vote came from. In the old days, you would have put your hand up with your knife in your hand, because it showed that you know, your hand is not empty. It shows that you're a free man. And I think that's just fascinating. And again, it demonstrates that I, as a warrior, have coin. Because, you know, I can afford to carry 2 seaxes if I wanted to, and a Langsax and a sword. Because as a Norse and Anglo-Saxon warrior, I am that wealthy. And how much would one of these be worth back in the day? Well, they say that a good sword or a helmet is worth a good portion of land, or the same as your longhouse. So this would probably be, you know, a third of a price of a longhouse, maybe a quarter, depending on the size of the property, or maybe half a year's wages. It's hard to say, really. I mean, a lot of people had the ability to make items themselves because there was very clever people. Because if you had to make something, and most farmers probably had a small forge, and you can't afford to wait a week for somebody to come and make it for you, you had to make it yourself. So you had to learn how to craft, and crafting is such an important aspect. So that is covering the status. Of course, if you was a slave, you would not own a knife like this. But if you was a slave and your master, your owner, gave you a knife and said, look, you know, Olaf, you know, you've been in my ownership for many years now, you know, I brought you back from, you know, if you, let's say you're Scandinavian, I brought you back from England, maybe he was a monk, maybe he was a Christian Saxon, and you know, he's worked hard. So you'll say one day, right, there, Olaf, I'm giving you a knife, you know, I got your freedom, you know. And I expect that would also probably bring about, you know, respect for your family as well when you'll stay there, but perhaps you'll travel. It's a whole different debate. But yes, status is very important in the medieval times, and I don't get everything right, but I do try to. So, practical uses of this. Well, the first practical use of this is that, well, you can eat your dinner with it. You could cut your meat, you could stick it in your meat and feed it into your mouth, you could slice your bread. So it's got a lot of uses for eating, for cooking and preparing food. I've used this in crafting, so you can see the black marks. That comes from me using this last year to debark some willow. Whenever you debark, you always end up with these black stains. It needs coming off at some point, but I've not quite got round to it. I could use this, and I've used it for wood carving, for instance. It's not the best knife for wood carving, but it does work. I've certainly worked on a few spoons, and I made a few handles with this knife. It is very razor sharp. But over the years, I tended to stop using it for craft because I don't want to damage it. I don't want to make it blunt, because every time you sharpen it, you take a little bit more off the edge, you know, half a millimetre, maybe less, and gradually your knife becomes less. And you can always see already, because there's the original, probably the knife edge, and it's probably already a mil down at this point, and probably a millimetre down here. So it's probably already lost some edge due to resharpening, and I have resharpened it a few times. So again, it has got a lot of uses around the farmstead, but it's also ideal for warfare because it is a great little backup weapon. Believe it or not, you can do a lot of damage with one of these. If you're fast, you could definitely beat a man with a sword. I mean, one blow in the right certain area and you're taking that man out. But of course, it doesn't give you much reach. That's about 5 to 6 inches in reach. And it's not the most longest of knives to use over the shield wall. But as Anglo would say, if that's the only thing you've got, you're going to use it. And of course, within the shield wall, you got a lot of cover. So you could stab with it. You could stab down as well into people's necks, backs, their heads, if they're not got a helmet. So this could do an awful lot of damage. But it'll be my last choice of a weapon to take into battle. I would say I would wear it into battle, and if I run out of all my weapons, if I lost my sword or my axe fell out and didn't have an axe, then this would be the weapon I would use as a last resort. But I'll still carry it with me, whether it's hanging from my pouch or in my leather shoulder bag. So, yes, it's got a lot of uses when it comes to crafting, cooking and warfaring. And let's face it, that is a rather dangerous weapon in lethal in the right hands. So my personal history: when did I buy it? How much did I buy it for? And where did I buy it from? Well, actually, I didn't buy this knife. I was given it. It was a gift from Thorolf, who was one of the Vikings from the the RB Viking group back in the 1990s. He gave me quite a few bits of his kit because he kind of gave up the hobby and didn't know what to do with his kit. I was new. He sold me a few pieces, but then he decided just to give me quite a few pieces of Norse and Anglo-Saxon kit, and I'm very grateful that he did. And I think that would have been round about between 1999 and 2002. So I've roughly owned this Seax for over, I would say about 24 to 25 years. So a quarter of a century. And like I said, it will go to the grave with me, because I would like to be buried as a Norse pagan and take a few grave goods with me. A good sword, a good spear, a handful of silver in my pocket, a good old horn of mead, and a few other things, and a good Thor's hammer, and send me to Valhalla. But yeah. So it's got a lot of personal history to me. It means a lot. It is a very sentimental piece. I would really not like to sell this knife, give it away or lose it. I would be really gutted if we ever lost this knife. And surprisingly, these knives can be quite easy to lose. You're marching through a wood, it pops out of the sheath, you don't see it fall down on the ground, and the next minute you realise when you're back at camp, oh, where's my Seax? You've gone and lost it. And in fact, many years ago, when we was reenacting at a place, this one was lost in the wood, this knife here, which is another favourite of mine, blunt Seax, and luckily it was refound in the wood, so that would not be around today. So for me, it's a lot of personal history. And again, same with this one. That has a lot of personal history because I've owned it for so long. But we'll talk about that Seax on another day. So why do I choose it? Well, I choose it because of the basic elements of design. I choose it because I love the boar. I choose it because of the personal history to me. I choose it because it's a way of honouring my friend Thorolf when I watch the videos, and you all on the very old videos fired a lot of really good comments from Tepto Sagers was his YouTube name, and very knowledgeable man who I miss dearly. And he was also a very good friend of Tirkir Thorkelson. Hello Tirkir, if you're watching this video. I don't think he will be because he only watches his own videos. Surprisingly. So why I still love this Seax? Because it's my favourite Seax. It's the one I've owned them. Probably one of the longest Seaxes I've owned, I think. It is the one that I treasure the most. Again, it is a sharp Seax, so it's not for combat. And don't wear this into battle. If you got caught wearing this into battle, you're going to get told off. Because even in a sheath, and nearly stabbed my hand there, it's still got a point on it, but I didn't, luckily. Even with a sheath, it could pop out, stab you in the leg, it could hurt yourself with somebody. So we don't take sharps into battle. And any reenactment group that lets you do that really need to be told off, because we need to keep reenactment with a good reputation and not cause injuries by mistake in battle. So of all the blades I own, this is the one that I will be buried with. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've enjoyed this video, if you've got any questions, suggestions for what I can do a close-up video on next, then please do let me know. That's always appreciated. I think one of my next videos is going to be about one of my infamous legendary leather shoulder bags, because they're so useful. And until we see you again, if you're new to the channel, I am Braggy. I am a historian, a storyteller, and a bit of a dude. It's goodbye from me. Goodbye from Braggy. It's time for the end screen. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a comment or two or three.